and welcome you all to this insightful conference. First of all, I would like to take you through the wonderful journey of our eminent personality, the speaker of today's session, Dr. Savita Kulkarni.
Dr. Savita Kulkarni is the Assistant Professor at Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, Maharashtra, India. And she is also in charge of the Center for Behavioral Economics in GIPE. She completed her doctoral research in the areas of social preferences, game theory, and experimental economics, and played a key role in introducing behavioral economics courses for undergraduate as well as postgraduate programs at GIPE. She delivered several workshops on the subject to students, corporate houses, and government departments. Also, initiated informal meetups on behavioral sciences in the city of Pune, which received enthusiastic responses from entrepreneurs and experts from other fields.
It's a great pleasure to welcome such a noted personality as our guest of honor today. We feel very happy and lucky to have your presence here, ma'am. So, on behalf of one and all present here, I extend our sincere welcome to Dr. Savita Kulkarni to this session. Ma'am, your audio is...
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone. Thank you Dr. Manju for having me here. A wonderful opportunity. I have been attending sessions since morning and they were all very insightful. Quite happy to share my knowledge, my perspective on this particular subject. So the topic that I have chosen for my presentation is behavioral public policy, critical assessment of nudge theory. Allow me to share my screen.
Yeah, ma'am. Before that, they will invite the moderator, Professor Manju Nair.
Oh, I'm so sorry, I missed that.
Savita, ma'am. And it's pleasure. Let me welcome the eminent and talented personality, a faculty from our own institution, to moderate today's session, Professor Dr. Manju S. Nair. And I would like you all to have a glance on her academic excellence. Dr. Manju S. Nair is serving as a professor of economics and honorary director, Center for Agroecology and Public Health, Department of Economics, University of Kerala. She is also Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences, University of Kerala. She is specialized in macroeconomics, econometrics, agroecology, public health and decentralized governance, and public policy. And she authored 8 books, several policy documents, and numerous papers. She is a gold medalist for her graduation and post-graduation from University of Kerala and has additional Master's of Degree in English Language and Literature and Financial Management. With 25 years of teaching and research experience, she has produced 9 PhDs and 25 MPhil degrees. She has also undertaken collaborative studies with NABARD, Norwegian University of Life Sciences, and European Union. Currently, she is also the Nodal Officer for Concurrent Evaluation of National Food Security Act for the states of Kerala, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Lakshadweep.
We are extremely happy to have one of our efficient and eminent faculty as our session's moderator. Thank you, ma'am, for your wholehearted presence here. Last but not the least, I would like to extend my warm welcome to all participants present here to this session. Hope you all are having enriching sessions.
So once again, I wholeheartedly extend my warm welcome to you all on behalf of me and Department of Commerce, School of Business Management and Legal Studies, University of Kerala to this session. Now, I welcome Manju ma'am to moderate today's session. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Savita Kulkarni, Dr. Biju, and other participants. And we are into the third session of the International Conference on Behavioral Nudges for Public Policies in India. And now we have an expert in the field of behavioral economics, Dr. Savita Kulkarni, who will be speaking on behavioral public policy, critical assessment of the nudge theory in India. So when Dr. Biju invited me to be the moderator of the session, I was reminded of reading the second chapter of Economic Survey 2019, titled The Policy for Homo Sapiens, and where in the abstract, I think it's a second sentence where it is stated, drawing on the psychology of human behavior, behavioral economics provides insights to nudge people towards desirable behavior. And the chapter then illustrates how the Swachh Bharat mission, the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, have all these things have successfully employed behavioral insights. And then it extends by laying out an ambitious agenda for social change, from give it up for the LPG subsidy to think about the subsidy, from tax evasion to tax compliance, from Swachh Bharat to Sundar Bharat, etc. I'm citing these because these have been documented as successful in maybe inverted commas. I would like to place examples of the effect of using nudges in public policy by the Economic Survey. Now, I also remember the Kerala Economic Association organizing a conference in relation to the arguments posed in the second chapter of Economic Survey and the many criticisms that were raised. And it's true that behavioral insights definitely have the potential to aid in effective public policy, and also that the popularity of using behavioral insights for policy design is growing. However, there is also a need to be very much cautious about the limitations of behavioral economics in bringing about desirable behavioral change, as well as the impact of the decisions that the choice architecture enables. It's also necessary to clarify whether the government considers behavioral economics as an antithesis of the neoclassical standard economic model, or believes these two sub-disciplines to be complementary. And equally important is the need to deliberate upon the philosophical and the ethical concerns about the nudge policies. And these years of empirical research and philosophical discussion has highlighted definitely the limitations of the nudge theory. Dr. Savita Kulkarni's talk today, as I understand, is based on this premise. She aims to present an overview of successful as well as failed nudges across the globe while introducing dark nudges and sludges, constraints to implement nudges in India, and the evaluation of nudges and the underlying philosophy in a democratic setting will also be discussed. That's what I understand. So I'm sure that we'll all be enriched by the session by Dr. Savita. So over to you, Dr. Savita.
Thank you, Dr. Manju. Great to have you here, and you appropriately, correctly summarized the whole premise of my talk. So thank you very much for that. I'll just share my presentation.
Yeah, ma'am, it is visible.
Yes. So I would like to present the critical assessment of the nudge theory which has been celebrated world across for its benefits or the outcome that nudges actually receives at a minimal cost. So what are the critical, what are the critical points that policymakers should consider? Is what I'm trying to present in today's talk. So yeah. So by and large, till now, public policies were actually informed by neoclassical economic theories. As Dr. Yes, I hope I'm audible now.
Yes.
Okay, okay. Thank you. And extremely sorry for this technical glitch. We actually we had this testing yesterday too, but the computer was all fine yesterday. Fine. Okay. So let me start with the presentation. As I was mentioning that public policy till now, by and large, has been informed by neoclassical theories, neoclassical theory of rational choice. And what are the important assumptions or axioms of this theory is that people or individuals have stable preferences. Okay, so their preferences do not change because of the external factors. Okay, so the way a particular product has been presented should not ideally affect their preferences, their choices. Is basically the underlying assumption of this theory. Then the other critical assumption, one is the unbounded rationality or unlimited skills to do the computation. And this is especially for when it comes to judging or rather computing probabilities. Okay, so neoclassical theory assumes that individuals are very much capable of considering all the possible outcomes and is able to able to even compute the probabilities. They are also Bayesian updaters, so they can actually update their probabilities as and when information changes, and that's why their predictions or their estimations are likely to be accurate. They will not make any mistake. in predicting the probabilities. Okay, so that is the second assumption. Third assumption is monotonicity in preferences. What does it mean? Is that you always, these rational individuals always prefer more over less. So higher the quantity of goods is preferred over less quantity of goods. Okay, and then optimization. All these rational individuals are always engaged in optimizing. Okay, so what do we mean by optimizing? Is that individual always try to maximize their utility against the given budget constraint. Okay, so the key over here, so what are the two key assumptions or the underlying phenomena is that individual choices are primarily affected by their information set. What information do they have? And second, the budget constraint. There are no other factors which would affect their thinking process. In this context, neoclassical theory predicts or presumes that the thinking process or the economic decision making of rational individual is perfect. It is perfect. It in a way, what can I say? It in a way replicate or reflect the constructivist rationality. Okay, not the ecological rationality, but the constructivist rationality. That means these certain assumptions are always satisfied, and that's how they make decisions. Okay, and then there is hardly any scope for any kind of a error, and if at all there are errors, then these errors are essentially unsystematic. They are quite random to be ignored. Okay, so these are the basic premises of neoclassical economics, and based on this, we have seen that for a long period of time, world across, public policy has been based on these assumptions. That means once you provide more and more information to individuals, to the citizens would make better choices, or you try to influence their budgets either by taxing them, either by levying taxes or by giving them subsidies. The moment you influence their cost benefit analysis through public policy, their behavior would change. And that's why providing more information and affecting, and the reward and punishment. These are seems to be the two important mechanisms for behavioral change, considering the neoclassical economic framework. Okay, and so the individual who actually follow all these axioms or assumptions is also known as Homo economicus. Okay, now the question is Homo economicus completely fictional? Well, yes, Professor Thaler, Richard Thaler says that by and large this character icons or Homo economicus are actually the fictional characters. On the other hand, everyone or majority of the population in the world are actually Homo sapiens. Okay, so what do you mean by Homo sapiens? These are the individuals whose decision making are actually quite imperfect and influenced by many psychological factors. Many psychological theories can actually explain their thinking process much better than what neoclassical economic theory does. Okay, so as it has been discussed since morning, that more than 95 or 98% of the decisions that we make every day and in our life can be explained, or we basically take this decision using automatic thinking process. Okay, thinking process which doesn't involve lot of deliberation. It doesn't involve lot of strategic thinking. And most of the time, we happen to take decision first, and then we try to rationalize it. Then we try to provide some reason for the decision that we have already taken, which goes completely against the earlier theory of neoclassical rational choice theory. Okay, so the two important aspects over here: one, we rely heavily on automatic thinking process, and plus, this is also systematic in nature. Our reliance, our dependence on it is quite systematic. Okay, so it's not the case that only sometime some section of the population rely on automatic thinking process. That's not the case, and that's why there are behavioral patterns which can be predicted. Why? Because there is this kind of a systematic nature in using automatic thinking process. Okay, and again, this is backed by a lot of empirical research. Okay, and this is also where behavioral economics actually diverge from neoclassical theories. People would like to call neoclassical economic theory more as a normative theory. Okay, normative means it is something like as if it should happen in the ideal state. Whereas behavioral economics, as we all know, is basically the descriptive theory. It tries to describe the behavioral pattern or the empirical data that we in fact observe. Okay, so yeah, so the behavioral research have actually shown that not only information but the way information is being presented also matters for the decision making. Okay, so the way a particular product has been designed, the way it has been framed also affect the decision making process. I'm sure all of you must be aware of the framing or the Asian disease example, how framing, positive and negative framing influence the decision making. Similarly, paradox of choice. Okay, the classical theory believes that individuals should be respected for their agency to think and choose for the best or for their betterment, and that's why they should be offered with more and more alternatives, more and more options, and they would able to choose the best that which is best for them. However, behavioral economics has established the paradox of choice, that more the choices that you offer, people actually get confused and they end up making the same conventional choices rather than going for the new ones. Okay? And probably that is also one reason why most restaurants afford to have long menu card, but if you actually see their kitchen, there are not much difference in terms of menu. Like there is not much variety of menu that they prepare. Why? Because most of them, they also know that people like to see a lot of choices, but they end up choosing only the typical food items. Okay, so that is a very interesting example of paradox of choice. And similarly, information overload. The more and more information that is being presented to individual, that kind of challenges or that actually that actually gives them cognitive overload. They feel tired to actually read, understand, and incorporate everything in their decision making, and that this phenomenon is known as information overload. And they actually fail to take into account all the information, but rather they form their decision, they take their decision based on by picking up only certain cues, by having their own criterias or by having their own heuristics. And those heuristics matter, not really the computational algorithm which would incorporate all the information. Okay, so this is how basically the real life decisions are made. And similarly, there are a lot of cognitive and emotional biases that individuals are subject to. So all Homo sapiens actually have these phenomena actually represents the decision making process of Homo sapiens. And then the critical point is that now we need to have public policy which which takes into account all these phenomena, all these factors. Okay, so as we know that the public policy, the traditional public policy, it believes that the moment you alter the information set or the budget constraint, that is sufficient to bring behavioral change. That is sufficient to bring behavioral change. Okay, and that's why accordingly, public policy tools, the traditional public policy tools are basically information disclosure. Okay, provide the information about the new product, new services, and people will read and adapt themselves. Or the rewards, punishments, and the ultimate restrictions are basically ban or mandates. Okay, these are sufficient to bring behavioral change according to traditional or the neoclassical economic theory. On the contrary, behavioral economics believes that having just providing information does not really matter. Why? Because people may not able to incorporate all this information given the bounded rationality, given their bounded rationality. And that's why the behavioral public policy suggests that you can bring behavioral change by actually activating certain cognitive processes. And even even if you keep information and budget constraint constant, but just if you activate certain cognitive processes, people will make decision which is in their own favor, which will actually augment their own welfare. That is the underline, that is the basic philosophy of behavioral public policy. Okay, and accordingly, we have public policy instrument which are basically behavioral informed interventions, not the regular one. Okay, but the behaviorally informed interventions where you understand which are the biases likely to play a role in the decision making, and you try to counteract that. And second, obviously, the most popular, nudges. Okay, so before I actually go to nudges, I also want to show you why most public policy makers or planners are more fascinated with the nudges. It also, one reason also lies in the limitations of public policies tools. Okay, so one is the huge administrative cost that has to incur to implement the traditional public policies. So even if you want to give incentives, or if you want to impose taxes, give subsidy, you need to incur lot of administrative cost. Right from setting up a new department which will look into who are the beneficiaries or who are the defaulters, identifying them, tracking them, and then all sorts of paperwork and the bureaucratic formalities that needs to be taken first in order to implement these policies. So huge administrative cost. Okay, and given the country like India, where anyways public funding is relatively scarce, we always feel scared or insufficient. We always feel that there is an insufficiency, inadequacy of public funds. Then spending so much of money just to implement public policy has a huge opportunity cost, because same amount could have been actually delivered for actual welfare schemes. Okay, so there is a huge opportunity cost for such kind of a public expenditure, and that becomes a severe limitation for public policies. Okay, we are also aware of the, there are certain experiment that has been conducted which has proved that paying money or having rewards for certain action actually backfires. So some of you must be aware of this Cobra Effect. Okay, so this policy I think was implemented by Britishers before independence, and when they realized that because of the cobras, a lot of cobras, there is a lot of loss that take place in the farming. Okay, so they actually announce rewards to reduce cobra population. So they basically announce rewards that farmers who actually catch and catch and kill cobras and give the dead cobra at the police at the office would get the reward. And what it interestingly happened that in order to earn that reward, in order to maximize own income, people started farming cobras. So the number of cobras in fact increased after this public policy, after the announcement of reward. Okay, so this is how sometimes incentives might backfire, and then policymakers needs to be really very aware of such kind of effects, because one, the administrative cost that goes into, and then there is a counter product, there is a ill effects or opposite effects than intended. Okay, so these similarly, yeah, so these are certain limitations of public policy, and then on that background, certainly policies like nudge looks very lucrative to government, to any government. Okay, so what are nudge? All of us are aware. Nudge is basically any form of choice architecture that alters people behavior in a predictable way. Okay, without restricting options or significantly changing their economic incentives. Each term over here has its own significance. One, this choice architecture enables or yield uh, behavioral change. That's one. And plus it's more likely to be in a predictable way. So at least by definition, nudges do not expect that there would be any kind of a backfiring. Okay. Plus there are no restrictions, or the choice set is not really does not get shrink under nudge or under behavioral policies, behavioral public policies, which in fact happen in case of traditional policies. Okay, something when you impose bans or restrictions, you are essentially reducing the freedom of or constraining freedom of your citizens, and plus without changing economic incentives, which are really economic incentives are actually left unchanged. And this actually, so something nudge is basically considered as a very gentle push, as it is depicted by this picture, a big elephant pushing the baby elephant very gently, but that actually leads it to move ahead, progress. Okay, so certainly nudges for good, with good intention, and we all of us are actually surrounded by a lot of nudges. We are always getting, we are without even aware without our awareness also we get nudged. Okay, so I'm sure in metro cities most of us must be using Uber service, must be hiring Uber service. And how Uber has used behavioral insights. One, it basically consider that the moment you book the cab, it gives you what is the time expected for the arrival, for its arrival, and plus you also observe where the car is moving and how far it is from your location. That actually kills any kind of uncertainty whether the cab will arrive or not, because you can actually observe and monitor it. And as we know that uncertainty is the uncertainty always produces very negative sentiment, negative emotion in us, and Uber provider has basically tried to reduce it. So that is also one of the, so I won't say that's a nudge, but that's basically the behavioral intervention, behavioral insight that has been used. Similarly, card payment, which is preferred over cash, and that also reduces the degree of loss aversion that people generally expect at the time of making payments. Okay, and then nudges for healthy lifestyle. When we wear smart fit bands and when we set some kind of a target for footsteps. Okay, so that is kind of a nudge. So, by the end of the day, when you observe that you are little far away from the target, to achieve the target, you might actually prefer to take a walk and complete the target and feel good about yourself. So that's thing you are getting nudged for good. Okay, and similarly GPS system. You get all the information, right information, right time with right speed to navigate your location, to navigate your address. And again, why we are considering this as nudges? One, no economic incentives being unchanged, has been changed, and plus these are not really imposed on you. You can always decide to ignore your target of footsteps. You can also decide to ignore the GPS system and you can navigate your road by yourself. So your freedom is not really constrained, your economic incentives are unchanged, but they allow you to achieve what you want to achieve. It is in this sense we say that nudges for good. Okay, so this is basically a tagline that Professor Thaler and Professor Sunstein have used. That there are these nudges which are for good of the nudgee, the person who is getting nudged. Right. So another important nudge that I would like to discuss on this platform is basically the checklist. Okay, how important nudges could be. That some author has actually used this nudge, that they provided basic checklist to the the professionals, before they actually enter into the operation theaters. Okay, so checklist basically describe all the several standard critical processes of care that any operating theatre should fulfill, should have in place. Okay, so what is the use of having this? That one, by having such kind of a checklist, you tend to you basically reduce the cognitive load these medical professionals have just before the surgery, just before the performance. Okay, so it reduces the cognitive load, and that actually and also because you prepare the checklist with proper deliberation, it is likely to be much more accurate, and that's why you get better results, and it in fact does. Okay, so in the research it has been seen that all the hospitals which used these checklists, okay, for there the morbidity rate of patients fell from 1.6% to 0.8. And as we are talking about human lives, this any change, any positive change is phenomenal, is really very desirable and important. Okay. Similarly, the complications, post-surgery complications also fell from 11 to 7%. So nudges can be really very important policy tool. Okay, so given such kind of a background, definitely behavioral public policies would like to change, would like to implement nudges for certain, for these kind of advantages. One, because of unchanged economic incentives or information sets, but you still get the changes in the behavior of citizens. Okay, the administrative cost is likely to be minimal. Okay, because most of the time in public policy nudges include something like sending reminders, letters, emails, which were anyways was done earlier. Okay, so here what we are doing is that we are just reframing these letters, these emails, so there is no extra administrative cost that goes in. In that context, we can say that nudges are basically administratively very efficient. Protect freedom of choices of the citizens. Uh, even if so, there are certain risks and limitations that are attached with nudges. And before we recommend this instrument for wide-scale public policy, we need to be aware, or we need to at least take this into account as to what are the limitations and what are the limitations of nudge theory, what are the practical complexities that we might encounter when we actually implement nudges, what are the possible risks, and what are the possible long-term impact. Because when we introduce any public policy, it is likely to have a long-term impact. It might taper off over a period of time, but it does have long-term impact even at a country level, and that's why one should be very cautious about it. Okay. So yeah, so in case of India, as Dr. Manju rightly said that she basically cited the second chapter in the economic survey of 2018-19, which has elaborated the early initiatives that Indian government has taken to introduce nudges. Okay. The most famous one is basically Swachh Bharat mission, which tries to use nudges. Okay, so Swachh Bharat mission and the campaign of Beti Bachao and Beti Padhao, they're the early examples of nudges. Okay, both these campaigns basically tried using the social norms and the very fact that social norms regulate in behavior of most Indians. Okay, so both these programs made the social monitoring of individual action very easy in a rural setting, which anyways happens to be quite feasible and possible. Okay, so both the programs made social monitoring of individual action very easy, and thereby they attempted to engineer new social norms in the given context. Okay, so one of the key attempts under Swachh Bharat mission was to make a sense of disgust for open defecation very salient, and that was that was the trying to change the behavior. That was considered to be considered as a reason that people would change their behavior. Okay. Similarly, when it comes to under the Beti Bachao Beti Padhao initiative, government started with this program called Selfie with Daughters. Okay, and that campaign also created a norm to celebrate the birth of girl child or having daughters. Okay, and so as more and more parents posted their selfies with daughter, it achieved basically two important motives. One, it conveyed that it conveyed people like other people as to what is the norm about the birth of a girl child, and second, it also showcased that thousands of other people are actually acting in line with that norm. So the norm gets strengthened, and the more the strengthened norm is, other people have higher incentive to follow it, because we always like to follow what the group does. Okay, so yeah. Overall, the whole chapter has actually drafted 7 key behavioral principles to overcome various cognitive biases, especially cognitive biases like loss aversion or anchoring effect. And then it also records that behavioral aspect that can be further exploited and can be used to encourage people to give up LPG subsidy, one, and also to enhance the impact of Jan Dhan Yojana, and to help people move from tax evasion to tax compliance. Okay, all this, as you can see, all these 3 policies would affect the government treasury over a period of time if they are successful. To further strengthen these initiatives of implementing or launching behavioral public policy, Niti Aayog has basically partnered with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and also Center for Social and Behavioral Change, which is at Ashoka University, and they have basically established India's first behavioral insight units. Okay, right. So these are certain initiatives that Government of India has started taking up to introduce nudge in the public domain. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Alright, okay, thank you. Yeah, so clearly these initiatives at policy level of the central government are quite encouraging for behavioral scientists in the country. But at the same time, they have also triggered some debate, some discussion among academicians and also policymakers, mainly about the limitations of nudge theory and then some of the practical complexities which first needs to be addressed. Okay, so yeah, so before I discuss that, I welcome you all and I request you all to participate in this particular quiz. So what I want you is to visit this website called www.menti.com. It will ask you for a code. Please enter this code, and then there would be certain questions.
Yes, ma'am, it is working fine. Yellow lines on metro platform.
Yes, yes. You can also choose multiple options. The particular cognitive process is being activated. Okay, and this has been followed by the another option, that is nudge's welfare is augmented at just by herself. Okay, so these are the two important, two most highly voted options is what we can keep in mind. Now I would introduce another slide. So on the same slide, now you would get another question. Dr. Vicky, can you see the second question? yeah, 4:40, right, got it. Okay, so given the time constraint, I would I would discuss the result first. So if you can see on your screen, the first question to you was this, that if, there are yellow lines which are drawn on the metro platform directing people where to stand. Okay, uh, right. Okay, and so the question was this, that on what ground or on what criteria do you consider these as nudges? Okay, so most of you consider that this can be considered as nudge. Why? Because it first it basically activates certain cognitive process. Okay, what is a cognitive process? That you need to stand safe, and the yellow line clearly tells you, clearly indicates you what is the line beyond which you are safe, where you should stand. Okay, so the cognitive process, that the uncertainty as to whether you are safe or not, or where is the danger, that is being clearly reflected by the yellow line. And then nudge's welfare is augmented as judged by herself. True, because everyone wants to be safe, and that nudge improves her welfare. Okay, clearly, and of course, in this nudge, this first option is also applicable. Why? Because there is no economic incentive that is being affected. Okay, neither for the nudgee, that is individual who are standing on the line, there is no reward, neither there is any penalty for crossing that yellow line. Okay, of course they have the freedom of choice. If they decide, they can always cross beyond and they can stand near the metro. Even that is also possibility, but that obviously would threaten their own, would create threat for their life. Okay, so clearly we can say that yellow lines can be considered as a nudge for good. On the other hand, if you see, the second question was this, that if in the food delivery app, when you actually place the order, you have this checked box, the box which is already checked, which says that you are donating 5 rupees the moment you place the order. Okay, and here now the question is this a good nudge? And from whose perspective? Okay, so as some of you have said that no, so here as you can see, unaltered economic incentive, that's not really the case, because yes, economic incentive has been altered. You actually incurred that monetary cost of paying 5 rupees. Okay, your freedom of choice, yes, it is respected, because you can always uncheck the box, and the whole nudge is neutral. Okay, a particular cognitive process is being activated, of course. First, the moment you are because you are placing order for food, you are likely to be hungry, and in that hungry, in that influence of the visceral process of being hungry, you might you might choose to give donation, because you might feel sympathetic towards other people who are hungry, and you feel that they should you should donate for them. Okay, so that is fine. Najee's welfare is augmented as judged by herself. I doubt that, because you may or may not like to donate. Okay, so your welfare is not really influenced or augmented in this case. And then nudges welfare is augmented at the cost of nudges welfare, and yes, 16% of you have actually voted for this correct option. Yes, it is in fact true, because if you want to make a donation, you have alternative options, but probably this option has been introduced to take advantage of you being under the visceral impact of visceral process, you being hungry, where you are likely to actually take action uh, uh, in forceful way, that let me just clear it out, let me just place the order as early as possible so that I get the food early as possible, and in that process you are likely to overlook this nudge. Okay, so here and plus no information has been provided as to how this donation is being used. That information is not easily available to you, so you don't know whether the donation is being misused or not, whether it is being used for the right purpose or not. Okay, so here nudges welfare. Okay, the company which is actually introducing such kind of a option, such kind of an option, probably that company's welfare is augmented at the cost of Naji's welfare, where Naji happens to end up spending 5 rupees. Okay, so the reason why I asked you this question was this, that what criteria of nudges that met the following that are met in the following choice architecture. Okay, so right. So the reason why I provide these options is that nudges, or this whole phenomena of using behavioral insights for behavioral change, or the psychological processes for behavioral change, can be misused also. And famous example is basically Uber. In recent days, Uber, especially in United States, actually received a lot of criticism. Why? Because of their two nudges. One, they realized that on like on certain days or many days, drivers actually quit very early. And then if even if there is a demand, there is no supply of drivers, there are no supply of cabs. Okay, so how they nudge their drivers is that they started alerting their drivers that they are very close to hitting their particular target of income. Okay, and this alert was provided the moment, like when they are actually trying to log off. So when you are trying to log off, if you get that, okay, I'm just $6 away from achieving my target, then you are likely to choose another ride, though earlier you were actually willing to quit and go home. Okay, but drivers are nudges in this fashion. And similarly, drivers sending drivers the next fare opportunity even when the current ride is not over. So it kind of gives a temptation to the driver that he should continue driving, and that actually solves the company's problem, and that actually increases company's bottom line, the profits. But that might not work well for drivers. So drivers' welfare is not really augmented. Okay, so these, there are, so these kind of nudges are also called as a dark nudges. Okay, where dark nudges basically aim to change consumer behavior against their best interest. Okay, so dark nudges is exactly the opposite concept to nudges for good. And this raises the question, nudges for good as to whom, whose welfare are we augmenting? Another important concept that has been devised recently is basically sludges. What are sludges? Under this also cognitive psychological processes are used, but that are used against citizens or against nudges. Okay, so something like you might see that there were some British newspapers that had automatic enrollment. Even if you are trying their website, even if you are trying to read certain articles, even if you enroll for just as a trial subscriber, still you get automatically enrolled, and it becomes difficult to actually log out or opt out. Okay, so you need to invest a lot, you need to really browse their website a lot to find out where the close account option is. And because people are so busy and have less time, they may not end up doing that, and in that process company ends up having more subscriber and more revenue. Okay, so these are called as sludges. So these dark nudges and sludges are the exactly opposite concept to nudges for good. And then one should be really very cautious about it. Professor Richard Thaler himself has said that consumer needs to be vigilant, and they need to read the fine print, and give their businesses to companies that nudge for good and not for bad. Okay, so after even if we have the nudges, because of the evolution of dark nudges and sludges, now professor himself is recommending that we also need to engage in system 2. We need to also employ system 2 to ensure that we are not vulnerable to these companies which are trying to trying to maximize their own profits. Okay, so if you want to have the consumer welfare, you need to have the critical evaluation of nudges. Okay, then there are several instances where nudges have actually failed. Unfortunately, these cases are not really reported that frequently. So it has been seen that the famous behavioral insight team, okay, the very early institution that started using nudges. It has conducted more than 300 experiments, but only 69 has been published. So what happened to other experiments? Were they incomplete? Were they unsuccessful? You have no idea. Okay, and so authors have actually showed that the ratio is that small that if one has to consider this ratio as a representative of nudges as a discipline, like just out of 100%, only 23% are published. Okay, so we are not really talking about even the successful nudges, we are just talking about the publication. Okay, so clearly a lot of yeah, so failed nudges are not really published, and that becomes one big reason to kind of check this policy, like consider this policy with caution. Libertarian paternalism, as we know, that is the approach adopted by Richard Thaler and Sulstiner. That's how they basically recommend it. Okay, so Professor Thaler and Sulston says that the nudge itself is libertarian. Why? Because they preserve freedom of choices, and they are also paternalistic. Why? Because they also try to influence choices in a way that will make citizens better off and again judge by themselves. Okay. However, there are many critics who say that these two terms cannot go together. Why? Because paternalism itself implies that there are some kind of limitations which are imposed on your freedom, on your autonomy, and that too without your consent. Okay, and plus that is for some reason, that means the aim of improving welfare, but you never know what is the planner or the the government's interest and how government actually wants to improve your welfare. So paternalistic approach essentially constrain your freedom, and that is very much embedded in nudges, and that becomes one of the important criticism on it. uh, yeah, then okay, so now when it comes to designing of the nudges, okay, behavioral economics and behavioral sciences have established that behavior is basically the function of personality of the individual and the environment. E for personality, E for environment. And so the key goes with this, that if you want to design successful nudges, you need to really understand the environment, the context very well. And to understand context or the decision making process, you need to have a lot of data. Unfortunately, in the Indian context, many people would agree that data is not collected well, and neither it is managed or maintained well. It is not really collected well or not really updated well. And plus there is a lot of heterogeneity in the population, so not everyone's data is being captured. Okay, so there is anyways the data gap that exists, and in addition to that, there is also the problem of data illiteracy. So what do I mean by data illiteracy? That government agency needs to actually equip itself to analyze data in the scientific and objective manner. Okay, else what may happen is that bureaucrats and politicians are also subject to framing, because they themselves are human, are also subject to the biases, so heuristics and biases. So their biases can design or can shape public policies, and that might have disastrous results. Okay, so there is one research which has taken which was conducted in Denmark, has actually shown that how elected politicians often fail to evaluate data objectively, and how they always try to view data from their own ideological lenses. So if they actually stands for government, then they would see that public goods delivered by government are always of good quality. Whereas if they actually stand for the other party, where they actually vote for private service providers, then they feel that private service providers are always performing better. Okay, so objectivity is really missing in this case, and that and while designing a particular policy, one needs to be very careful about it. Okay? So yes, in addition, once we design nudges, the testing of nudges is really very important before we scale it up. Okay, and that's why randomized control trial can be the recommended method to check the effectiveness of nudges. But as we all know that randomization control trials has been criticized for their poor replicability. It's very difficult to actually replicate a particular experiment from one decision context to another decision context. Okay, so you may not always understand what is the causal relationship, what are the causal, or what is the mediating linkage between the treatment variable and your outcome variable. RCTs often do not explain that, do not really answer that. Okay, so that's one problem. And second, the huge, again, the cost in terms of time, financial resources and human resources to implement RCTs. Some RCTs actually run for years and years. Okay, so do we have that much of time before we actually evaluate a nudge and then introduce it in the public domain? That becomes one of the key questions in front of policymakers. And then, yeah, attitudinal change. The economic survey has suggested that with Beti Bachao and Beti Padhao and those kind of a campaign, we can re-engineer new norms, and that might bring social change. Now here I would raise my own personal doubt that whether we are looking out for motivational change or attitudinal change through nudges. Why? Because nudges essentially based on your automatic thinking process. Whereas I believe that motivational or attitudinal changes require deliberation, require you to consider things critically, understand, and then change your opinion. So I really doubt whether nudges have that potentiality to bring attitudinal change or to bring social change. Okay, so yeah, right. So in addition to that, before we use nudge theory very widely for public domain, for public policies, one need to have strong social institutional structure also in place. Institutional structure, one, to first have data, to gather data, to make that data available to the researchers so that they can understand and design nudges well. Evaluation, whatever data is collected during the evaluation process should be available for the honest scrutiny of the data, and plus transparency. The once nudges are designed, they should be open in the public domain for people to understand that they are being nudged. That is only called as transparency, and that should be there. Otherwise, there is a risk that citizens over a period might think that the government is manipulating them, and that creates the trust issue in a country, and trust can hamper a lot of economic transactions along with the political faith of the country. So these are really very important. Plus ethical concerns, which are very critical, which are embedded in nudges. So these ethical concerns, we need to have institutional structure which will address those ethical concerns. As we all know, for our individual small research project also, we need to present our research proposal in front of institutional ethics committee. We need to have very similar parallel body even at the central government or the government level, which will scrutinize these nudge proposals before it is being implemented. Okay, so we require institutional structure, strong institutional structure in place for to have really desirable impact. Okay, one also needs to be very cautious about lot of unintended and long-term consequences that nudges might have, and that happens with all public policies. As I just earlier discussed, Cobra Effect. That was the unintended consequence of a public policy. One need to be very careful about it. One need to be vigilant about this, and you need to also have one backup plan or the roadmap as to how you would combat such kind of unintended unintended consequences, or the policymakers needs to be responsible or prompt about addressing such unintended, unanticipated consequences. So this is how I would conclude my session, is that nudge, as we know, has proved its utility to change behavior across the world in different domains, in different contexts. But before we make it as a public policy tool where it has a macro impact, we need to have strong institutional structure in place for designing, testing, and evaluation before they are scaled up. The typical roadmap for designing a successful nudge is basically the whole research team, the policymakers needs to learn, they need to also engage in relearning what they like, breaking their assumptions, breaking their presumptions, need to relearn, unlearn, and then test, and test to really understand what is happening on the ground. Because we are dealing with the behavioral economics and the psychology, which is not the definite science, there has to have these kind of a permutation combination or trial and error cannot be skipped while designing nudges. One need to also accept that nudges are not the panacea. They cannot solve all the problems, okay, and they are also not free from the limitations, which is very similar to other public policy instruments. So there is no need to undertone nudges or criticize nudges unnecessarily, because this limitation lies with other instruments too. One size fits all approach is also unsuitable for the heterogeneous society like India. So you may not have one macro level nudge to bring behavioral change. You need to consider all the fragmented, segmented populations, and you need to understand what are the psychological processes that are taking place with respect to different segments and design nudges accordingly. Although we say that it's a low cost and simple way to shift behavior, not all behavior are equally easy to shift. And that has been seen in case of those failed nudges, that some habits cannot be broken with nudges, with pure nudges. Okay. Then intervention must match the nature of problem and realities of existing preferences, incentive, and psychology. So at the last, I would like to submit that eventually a society should transit from nudges to boost, okay, boost, which actually strengthen the capacity to administer or use agencies, capacity to use your rational thinking mind. So rather than relying only on the automatic thinking process, the architecture, the choice architecture should design the environment such that we actually employ our system too and take our decision, which would be useful for the citizens themselves and also for the democratic society like India. So that's my submission. Thank you very much, and apologies for the technical glitch. Yes, any question?
Ma'am, over to you, ma'am. Manju, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Savita, for providing us very useful insights on nudge theory and its criticisms. So I just summarize in a few sentences so that the participants can raise their queries. Dr. Savita has started with the neoclassical theory of rational choice of public policy, the axioms and the assumptions of the theory, and the statement that under neoclassical economics decisions are unaffected by emotions, and they have unsystematic or random errors. But more than 95% of the decisions are made through an automatic thinking process. And there are lots of empirical research contradicting the assumptions of the neoclassical theory, the influence of framing and decision-making environment, the paradox of choice and information overload, and the cognitive and emotional biases. And hence we need to have a public policy that take into account of all these factors. That's what she argued. And then the difference between the public policy, the traditional neoclassical public policy, and the behavioral public policy, and the Cobra effect, that was very wonderful, that picture also. And then about introducing nudges. What do you mean by nudge? The examples of nudging for good and Then the next session was on the risks and limitations of the nudge theory, particularly the policy lessons for India, the examples from the economic survey, the Swachh Bharat mission, the selfie with the daughter giving up on subsidies and all those things, and then the limitations about dark nudge. That is very important. Even we have and it was very interesting to listen to her quoting the subprime mortgage, the crisis, as what a consequence of the dark nudges, and then on the sludges also, failed nudges, etc. And yeah, recently one of my students submitted a thesis, her PhD thesis, 2 weeks back on urban green space utilization in agriculture, and it's from a behavioral economics perspective. And she was, I think, her thesis, a major theory that was based on the libertarian paternalist argument. And it was interesting to listen to Dr. Savita arguing that these two things never go together, liberty and the concept of paternalism. And finally, on designing of nudges, the personality is important and environment is important. And in the context of India, yeah, how do you collect data regarding the environment, the limitations imposed by the societal structure as such? And finally, all those the testing, that is also important, testing of the effectiveness of nudges using the randomized control trials, and for which we received what the Nobel Prize in economics also. And yeah, India received the Nobel Prize for that. Again, that's criticized for its replicability, where you have a different socio-political, religious, all sorts of what ideas designing the role of the society. And lastly, yeah, I think I was able to summarize Dr. Savita's main points, and now I invite the participants for raising their doubts or any observations regarding her presentation. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah. So thank you for such an insightful presentation, madam. I have actually two questions, not directly related to behavioral public policy, but I'll go with the question. My first question is how to nudge the political and permanent executives for developmental politics per se to the politicians and towards the ethical behavior, and what roles civil societies can play to nudge the behavior, not as a special interest group, but as a civil society to nudge the politicians and to nudge the businesses for sustainable practices, politician for ethical behavior and businesses for sustainable practices. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very interesting question. Yeah, so how do you nudge politicians? That's I think if we could do that, that would be wonderful. Yeah, so basically, I'm sure the way I explained in my presentation also, politicians, even if they have the office powers, are also subject to the same cognitive biases that all of us are. So we need to really check and find it, you need to have research as to how these cognitive biases interact with the forward, and accordingly how these cognitive biases influence their decision making. So once we understand that clearly, that would help us to design nudges. But I would go with my last one, my last submission, that instead of nudges, the boost is the more rational policy. Okay, so what are basically boost? Boost basically allows you to design the environment such that you, one boost or the educational nudges, where you make individuals think and decide. So even same kind of an environment should be provided to the politicians, where you force politicians to overcome their cognitive biases. Okay, this might happen through public, public gathering, public protest, or public demand. which will make politicians to think rationally to overcome their subjective biases. That is, I think, yeah, that's how we can actually do that. And civil society can all gather together, and there could be accountability and transparency that the civil citizens can demand from politicians. That will actually help to reduce the risk of getting manipulated or having dark nudges or the smudges. So the political, yeah, so that's how I would answer. I think Anirudhu is also around the morning speaker. If you would like to share his opinion, I welcome him. Am I audible?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. You're audible.
Shall I ask one doubt?
Yes.
I think I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am. You're audible.
Yeah, Dr. Savita, towards the last of your presentation, I saw your slide on one size fits all nudges cannot be useful. And yeah, it's true. The same is the case with one size fits all development policy suggested by the neoclassical economics. So both these, that's the nudge theory and the neoclassical mainstream economic theory, falls into the same system. Okay, once we make this argument. So nudge theory basically has been implemented in order to suit what the different strata of the society. And once you make such a statement, now both these become, what I feel is that now it's becoming equivalent to the neoclassical mainstream economic ideology. And secondly, once you argue that the capacity of agency of the people is to be boosted, now the same is what we say with regard to the neoclassical mainstream thinking also, as how can you effectively resist such ideology or that's practical aspects coming into a society. We say that you need to improve upon the capacity of agency of the people. So for nudge theory also, we are making the same argument. Okay, maybe your comments on that.
Yes. So I would like. So in my initial slides, where I introduced neoclassical economic theories, the whole theory has been described as having or based on the concept of constructivist rationality. That's an instrumental rationality which follows certain axioms. Not necessarily all individuals follow those axioms. Something like, we have all the intention gap. So we know what is good for us, but we fail to implement that. Now, what we are saying that introduce boost or have nudges, which will enable citizens to meet their intentions. Neoclassical economics, even if it is saying that you should think rationally, the rationality definition, the definition of rationality, is not exactly how the real people or individuals actually think about. Okay, so something like I would like to put it in this fashion that Professor Gerd Gigerenzer has basically talked about the smart heuristics. Okay, so the whole program of heuristics and biases has been criticized for bringing suboptimal outcomes. And then they say that there should be proper thinking, but the alternative school says that heuristics can actually increase your survival. Their evolutionary survival strategy, and that's why they are also good. So I am not going with the neoclassical economic theory which says that you need to think in a particular fashion because that's pretty normative. But I would definitely say that the ecological rationality and all the nudges, educational nudges or the boost, which would actually able to implement agencies is what is recommended rather than going for the nudges, blind nudges, because then there is a risk of being vulnerable to dark nudges or sludges. And given this risk, or the way earlier question was, how we can actually encourage political leaders from for having good nudges. In that case, having boost is a good idea. This like this, yeah. So this is how I would address you. I hope I address you now.
Yeah, there are some queries in the chat box.
Yes,
Should I
ma'am.
read?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, drinking alcohol, smoking by a celebrity is a dark nudge, whereas statutory warning in movies comes under system 2. That's reflective nudges, isn't it? That's the first one. And second is, do government design nudges based on reflective thinking system? Swachh Bharat, selfie doctors, etc., by avoiding automatic system thinking. That's optional schemes, retirement schemes, etc. System 1 and system 2.
Yes. So I will take the first question. Drinking alcohol by celebrities is a dark nudge. Yes, that's true. And statutory warning. Yes, you're quite right. Studying. Yes, your observation is quite right. And same question I think again from studying. Uh, yes. So any policy or designing of nudges, as long as there is lot of data on which the policy has been designed, I believe that it comes as a part of system 2, because you're still crunching data, you try to understand where the problem is, and then you introduce what, like you try to target a particular cognitive process that is creating problems. So any policy, as long as these mandates are met, as long as there is a data that inform your policies, there is some other. Once the nudges are designed, they are actually put in public domain for comment, where the delegation comments are actually received from public, and if alteration, modification is required, that is being introduced, then we can think that are such policy has basically used system 2, and government needs to do that. So the both the campaign that has been described in economic survey, I personally doubt whether these processes were used, or at least there is no research paper which describe that this is the data which shows that this is the social norm we have seen, and this social norm is actually very strong in certain districts of certain northern states, and that's why we are introducing this kind of a nudge. And then what is the public comment on that? These kind of a processes, at least I'm not sure whether they were followed or not. Okay, and so in that context, one may say that the nudges that we just described, Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, to what extent they are subject to the uh, cognitive biases or beliefs of politicians, that question remains unanswered. But yes, as long as the certain infrastructure is there, certain institutional infrastructure is there, and you follow certain procedures to design and evaluate nudge, we can say that nudges are safe. As long as government use this, we can say that nudges can be good. Have I answered your question, Stanley?
Yes, ma'am. Any questions? Any more questions?
I think Dr. Biju, we can wind up.
Yeah, we can check out any more questions remaining, then we can wind up.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
no
Thank you,
questions.
Dr. Savita, for spending your valuable time in enriching our understanding of nudges and its limitations. Yeah, it has been a very truly rewarding session for us. And special congrats and words of appreciation to Dr. Biju for organizing this conference, and thanks to all participants too.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Manju, Dr. Vijay, and audience for your questions. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. That was truly an insightful and information session for all of us. For this, I extend deep sense of appreciation for Dr. Savita Kulkarni for sharing her knowledge and thoughts on behavioral nudges for public policies in India. I also extend my sincere thanks to Professor Dr. Manju S. Nair for being a great moderator for this session. Thank you so much, ma'am. And also, thank you all participants for your keen and active participation. We expect the same active participation in the coming sessions as well. And also our sincere thanks to Dr. Vijay sir, the pillar of support for us as good organizer and a beloved faculty. Special thanks to you, sir.
Thank you.
So, once again, I extend sincere thanks to you all on behalf of me and Department of Commerce, School of Business Management and Legal Studies, University of Kerala.
So, with this, we have reached at the end of the second technical session and also the end of the first day of International Conference on Behavioral Nudges for Public Policies in India, Opportunities and Criticism, organized by Department of Commerce, University of Kerala. And we will meet tomorrow with the third technical session and presentation of conference papers sharp at 9 a.m. Participants, kindly join for the conference tomorrow on time. Till then, this is Surya and on other side, Shruti. And we also had Rahuma and Pooja in the inaugural and forenoon session from the comparing team signing off. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you both Manju ma'am and Savita ma'am for the remarks made in this session. Be in touch. Thank you. Thanks a lot.